Hi guys, just very quickly before this video starts, I do want to apologise for some issues in the camera quality. I recorded this video late Friday night just as I'd finished this book because I was desperate to share my opinions and thoughts on this. And clearly I was too tired to pay that much attention because the camera quality is horrendous, probably due to low lighting. Sorry, these things happen, and also because issues like to come in pairs. There was an issue, one of the files corrupted, so I lost a bit of footage. Again, deeply sorry, doesn't change my opinions that I am sharing, which I hope you'll still enjoy. So yeah, I hope it doesn't detract too much from the video. I also set myself a goal to give brief descriptions of the stories. Whether or not I succeeded depends on your definition of brief. But again, I hope you enjoy the video, and I'll try and make sure these gremlins don't appear in any future videos. Hello everybody, it is the end of a very exciting week. That week is exciting because our king of horror, Stephen King himself, released a new book on Tuesday called You Like It Darker. It's a collection of short stories. Some of them have been previously published in sort of obscure publications that not everybody has access to, but there are also 5 new ones. You might notice that I've only got an ebook copy at the moment. I did pre-order like the independent special edition, but then there was like supply issues apparently, and I couldn't wait until it came. So then I bought it on ebook and read it very quickly over the past couple of days. And I'm going to pick up the physical copy over the weekend. I probably won't do too many like standalone dedicated book reviews on this channel. However, Stephen King is my favourite author. This is the first time I've had a YouTube channel while he's had a new release. And also because it is sort of a collection of short stories, I've got more plots to talk about. So I thought, might as well make a video, share my thoughts on it. So what this video will sort of be is I'll go through all the different stories, give a brief plot summary, and brief is kind of the key word because a lot of these stories are quite short. So if I give you an in-depth plot summary, it's basically the whole plot because some of them are only like 10 pages long. So I'll try my best to make them brief but also long enough that you kind of get an idea of what the story's about. Then I'll give each story a star rating, and then at the end a star rating for the whole collection. I will give you a bit of a spoiler. I did quite enjoy this collection a lot. So the first story that we start off with is called Two Talented Bastids. As you can see, I've got my wee New England accent on for that. So this is basically about a gentleman called Lloyd Carmody, I don't know, he's got a last name. He's a very successful author. He's been successful for numerous decades. He's retired now, and his son's looking after him in his home because he's elderly, he's struggling to get around. At the start of the book, they kind of go over to Lloyd's sort of lifelong best friend's funeral because he's passed away. His friend was also very successful. He was a successful artist. And all this time throughout his career, people keep asking him, how did you and your friend both get so famous at the same time when you both came from a small town? Like there was no real reason for you both to get this famous sort of overnight, essentially, and coming from the same little small town where nobody else has really heard of anyone else from this small town. And throughout his career, all he keeps saying was, oh, we're just two talented bastards. That's why, it's just kind of luck. But once Laird dies, he sort of leaves a notebook for his son that tells the true story of how he became famous, how he managed to become really successful, how his best friends managed to become very successful. And it all goes back to this camping trip that they went on to a few decades before that sort of changed everything. And that's about as much as I can go into it there. This story was really good. I did really enjoy it. It's one of the longer ones in the collection. There are a couple of minor weird sort of inconsistencies, errors in one part of the book where they're in this sort of hunting lodge, and there's references to EpiPens and Judge Judy, but the year this was set is Judge Judy was just like a family lawyer, so no one would have known who she was, and EpiPens weren't around. That's annoying some people that I've seen. It didn't bother me too much. I was like, oh, that's a bit of a mistake, who cares, doesn't really affect the story that much. But if that kind of thing annoys you, you might not enjoy this story too much. But I gave it 4.5 stars. It was good. I enjoyed it. Wasn't the best story in this collection, but it was definitely up there. Next story in this is called The Fifth Step. There's this elderly gentleman who every single morning goes to read his newspaper on this little bench in the park. One day, a stranger comes up, sits down next to him and asks him for a favour as part of his sort of Alcoholics Anonymous recovery process. and this gentleman allows him, does him the favour, and that's really all I can say without spoiling a lot of it. I really like this one. It was really short, sort of snappy. I didn't guess the exact way that it was going to go, but I kind of had an inkling. I really enjoyed it. It kind of gave the vibe of like a retelling of like an urban legend. Like it definitely had that sort of feeling, like you'd have all these people around a campfire telling all these stories to scare little kids, things like that. It did have that feel to it. I did enjoy it. 4.25 just because it was like a little bit short, but it was kind of punchy. I did enjoy it. At the end I was like, oh, that was an exciting ride. So yeah, that was The Fifth Step, which I really enjoyed. Next on we have Willie the Weirdo. I think this is, if I recall correctly, my least favourite story in the collection. Still enjoyed it, but it's not something that I'd rush to sort of reread. So there is this 10-year-old boy called Willie, nicknamed Willie the Weirdo, because he's kind of odd, sort of obsessed with death and gross sort of things. His grandfather lives with them. His grandfather's kind of a recluse, doesn't really speak to that many people other than Willie. They go in, they have like a lot of conversations. Willie sort of asks his granddad to keep telling him like creepy, gross, gruesome stories. That's sort of the main bulk of it until it gets to the end. What I will say is the ending really did probably like boost this up a little bit. At first, if it wasn't for the way it ended, I probably would have rated this lower, but like the last couple of sentences really like pulled together a lot of other things that are going on throughout the story. So yeah, I gave this 3.5 stars. Like I said, it wasn't bad. It was all right. I probably wouldn't read it again, you know, desperately. Next we come over to my favourite story in the whole collection. It's also the longest one by quite a wee bit. This is Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. This is one of the new ones in the story I meant to say earlier. Two Talented Bastids was also one of the new stories and that was just published in this collection. The second one is Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. This is such a good story. So it starts off, this guy, Danny, is having a bad dream. Wow, who would have thought? Basically in this dream, he stumbles across this sort of deserted, rundown gas station. And round the back, he finds this dead body. He wakes up and it was a very visceral dream. It felt incredibly real. And normally when he has bad dreams, they sort of like fade away, you know, once you wake up, as happens with a lot of people, but this one really stuck with him, stuck around. So he did a bit of research. He found the gas station that he saw was a real one and he couldn't get out of his head. So he went to the actual real life gas station and there was actually a dead body behind the gas station. So he reports it to the police and obviously they think that he's the killer because, you know, the old I saw it in a dream excuse doesn't really fly too much. So it's multiple perspectives. Obviously one perspective is Danny and then the other are the two police officers that are investigating him for this crime. It's so good, it's so interesting, it's really tense. Obviously you know that Danny's innocent, but sort of it's really tense going back and forth with the police and him because you know he's innocent, so you're sort of feeling this injustice, but then you're also like, well, yeah, if I was a police officer, I probably would have thought he'd done it too. And one of the police officers really gets like an obsession against Danny because he's convinced that he's the killer and he's trying to go to all these different lengths to sort of prove that Danny is the criminal. He should get arrested and caught. A really good story. There is the classic sort of Stephen King can't really write dialogue between children because there was this one scene where they were 8-year-olds playing and one of them used the term radical. I don't think that term's been used by children since the turn of the century, but, you know, cut him some slack. He's an old man, doesn't really speak to many children, I don't think. Still gave the story 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Very good story. I'll be reading it again probably very, very soon. It did also sort of give me a... it reminded me of another story that I'm not going to say because knowing that the person's innocent will ruin the story. But there's 2 stories now that I've read of this sort of innocent persons getting investigated by the police for a serious crime. I don't know what it is about it, but I really love it. I don't know if that's a genre, but I'm going to try and find similar books because I really, really loved it. So our next 3 stories are ones that have been previously released. So the first one is Finn. Finn has always, you know, had quite a bit of bad luck throughout his life. Things go wrong for him all the time. He seems to get injured, very clumsy. One day there's sort of a very serious stroke of bad luck and he gets mistaken for another person and gets kidnapped by this group that obviously have something against the other bloke. Yeah, don't know much what else to say. He's kidnapped, it's not him, he tries to tell him it's not him. It's alright story. 3.75 I gave it. So, you know, not bad, good, but again, sort of similar to Willie the Weirdo. I'm not going to rush to read it again. Next story is on Slide In Road. So this is about this family of 5. So there's 2 kids, parents, and then the grandfather. They're going over to see their grandfather's sister, who's sort of on her way out. She's not doing the best, so they're going to sort of pay final visits to her. The granddad knows a shortcut, so they're going along this sort of thin, dirt country road. There's a sliding on the road, so the dad has to back up the car. When they back up the car, he rolls it into a ditch. So they're kind of stuck on this road. So these kids go up to investigate this sort of rundown, old abandoned inn while they're there. And then they meet these 2 gentlemen that offer them help to get back onto the road. And some other things go on, as you'd imagine, because this isn't a book collection about people doing nice deeds for each other. It is a dark book collection. But yeah, another 3.75. It's a good one. I preferred it to Finn, but didn't like it enough to give it 4 stars. So, you know, if StoryGraph had like one in between, I'd probably put it there, but I still enjoyed it. This next one is Red Screen. This and another one that I'll talk about later really did give me sort of old school Twilight Zone TV show vibes. So there's a detective who's called in because this guy's murdered his wife and called the police, and he's admitted to what he did. So this guy's going in to sort of interrogate him, investigate him. And the guy that's investigating says, yeah, no, I killed her, but that's not my wife. And they're like, oh, it's this woman's your wife. He's like, yeah, that's not his wife. Essentially, he believes that aliens have come down and sort of taken over people's bodies, and the person that he killed wasn't actually his wife. It was this alien that's trying to overthrow the human race. He's gotten deep involved in sort of these dark web conspiracy sites. And apparently there's this big conspiracy that aliens are coming over and taking over people. And that's really all I can say. That doesn't spoil the ending. The ending is very good, and it did give me a bit of a creepy shudder. I did like it. I think the ending really does bring it all together, kind of like Willie the Weirdo. But the difference between this and Willie the Weirdo is the whole rest of the story was stronger as well. I give this 4 stars. Like I said, I really like it. I do really like the old Twilight Zone series, so that probably did play a part. But yeah, I enjoyed this one. Good sort of alien spookiness. So then, next one is the second one that gave me Twilight Zone vibes, is the Turbulence Expert. It follows Craig Dixon, who's a turbulence expert as his job. I literally cannot say anything more about that or explain any more about that because that will just ruin the whole story. 4 stars, I enjoyed it. The next story is Laurie. So Lloyd is sort of an old widow. He's really struggling to cope with the grief from losing his wife. So this is a couple months after his wife has died, and he's still really struggling, sort of depressed, not really wanting to go out and do much. So his sister comes over to try and cheer him up and brings him a puppy, which, side note, don't give people live animals as gifts unless they've agreed that they want it. But for the story, it worked really well. He sort of, at first, he didn't really want the dog. He's like, no, I'll just look after it for a bit, but it's not going to be permanent. And then from looking after Laurie, he's really forced to look after himself. He becomes a lot more positive, upbeat, outgoing. And then one day when he's out walking this dog, Laurie, something happens. To give you a bit of a clue, I mean, the US book cover is based off of this story, so I'll put that there and you can sort of guess what goes on. I gave this 4.5 stars. I did enjoy it, but just not as much as Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream and a later 5-star that I'm going to talk about in a bit. So Rattlesnakes is the story that comes next. This is another brand new one, and this is sort of a follow-up to Cujo, one of Stephen King's novels from yonks ago. So if you've not read that, probably don't watch this plot summary because it'll give you spoilers. I'll put a thing for you to skip. But essentially, it's 40 years on from the events of Cujo. We're following Vic Trenton, obviously the father from that story. His wife has passed away, so again, dealing with a lot of grief. So because he's dealing with all this grief, he goes to spend the summer in his friend's house in Florida because it's a quiet time of year because it's ridiculously hot, so no one's going there. And the only other person on the street while he's staying there is this older woman who also had children die when they were quite young. Again, see, this is why I said don't watch this if you've not read Cujo, because it lets you know that Vic's son Tad died. So she keeps pushing around this stroller the whole time, acting as if her children are still real. Still alive, they're still real. These children were killed by rattlesnakes, as per the title. And then one day this old woman dies and someone's got to look after her kids, don't they? So yeah, it was a good story. I gave this 4.75. It was a bit of a longer one. At some points there were some bits that were a little bit slower, but I still really enjoyed it. It was still good. Still classic King creepy. He loves a wee creepy child, he does. So 2 stories left. Second last is The Dreamers, another brand new story for this collection. This stenographer gets hired by this sort of eccentric mad scientist guy that's doing experiments on people's dreams. And yeah, some pretty wild stuff happens, as you probably imagine. I gave this one 4 stars. It was good. I enjoyed it. Just again, not the strongest in the collection, but I did enjoy it. It sort of gave me Revival sort of vibes, if you've read that one by Stephen King. Sort of mad scientist, crazy stuff goes on. Last story in the collection is The Answer Man. So there is this newly qualified lawyer and he's sort of debating whether or not he wants to join his father's practice or sort of move to this small town that he went to a lot growing up and start the first law practice in the small town. He's really struggling to make this decision, so he goes over to his family's holiday home in this small town to try and think things over. At the end of the weekend, he still doesn't have a decision, but when he's driving home, he sees this stall. So the Answer Man will answer any questions you may have as long as you pay him. They're always correct, they're always the right answers. You can ask him questions about the past, future, whatever. So he meets this Answer Man sort of 3 times throughout his life, asks him various questions. The first sort of round are about if he's going to be successful, what he should do about his law practice, things like that. And then over time, the questions he asks obviously changes as he has a family. And this one is very good. I do enjoy it. Although it was quite emotional at some points. This is the other one that I gave a 5 star. I did debate giving it a 4.75 because I didn't really like it as much as Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, but I still really, really enjoyed it, and 4.75 felt a bit harsh, even though it's still a really good rating, so I gave this one 5 stars. So as for the book as a whole, I had this really lovely plan that I was going to go through each individual one and give each story a star rating and then work out the average for the whole book. I did that. The average I got with the 12 stories was 4.25 stars, and I was like, oh, that's great. Like, that's the perfect number to fit into my StoryGraph rating. I use StoryGraph mostly for ratings. I also use Goodreads, but I don't use it as much. And you can do quarter-star ratings. So I put it in as 4.25, and then I felt bad. It's like, oh, I feel like it deserved more. So 4.5 stars is the final rating that I gave to Stephen King's brand new short story collection. Might be a bit controversial. This is my favourite collection that I've read from him so far. I have only read Skeleton Crew, Night Shift, and If It Bleeds. That might be very controversial for some people. Those collections did have some really, really, really good stories. However, they were longer collections, and always the risk that you have when you've got more stories included in collections, you're going to have more that just aren't that good. So, but those other ones, they did have stories that I really enjoyed, but there are other ones that were skips for me that sort of dragged the whole thing down. None of these were a skip. Some of them maybe were ones that I'm not as excited to go back to, but the bangers really did lift this one up. So I gave it 4.5 stars, and I'm really excited to pick up my physical copy tomorrow. But that is the end of my review. If you've not checked out Stephen King's new book, I would highly recommend it. It is, as I've said, my favourite short story collection from him. It's nice to see him sort of stretch those short story muscles. He's very well known for a lot of his long, chunky books, but he can also write very well in the short format, as he's proven time and time again. Let me know if you like these sort of dedicated book reviews. Like I said, probably won't do too many of them. Mostly I'll talk about books that I've read in monthly wrap-ups, just sort of briefly. So stay tuned for those if you're interested in hearing about the other books that I've read this month. But I will see you next time. Bye-bye.